What can I get you? Not how can I help you? Not is everything all right? What can I get you? The language of a transaction, not a conversation. Vivian leaned slightly toward the aisle. She kept her voice low, deliberately low, the kind of low that says, "What I'm about to tell you is not for the cabin to hear." "I need to speak with the captain," she said. Nicole's eyebrows rose. "The captain?" "Yes." Quietly. "It's important." The captain is flying the aircraft. If you need something, I can help you." "I understand. But what I need to communicate is a security concern, and it needs to go to the flight deck." Nicole's expression shifted. Not to alarm, to assessment. She looked at Vivian the way people look at passengers who say the word security on an A-plane. The way that word changes the temperature around the person who says it, making them either a source of help or a source of problems, and the determination of which depends on factors that have very little to do with the word itself. She looked at Vivian's clothes, her hair, her hands, which were empty, her face, which was calm. What kind of security concern? Nicole asked. Her voice had dropped too, but not out of discretion, out of caution. She was being careful with Vivian the way you're careful with something that might be fragile or might be dangerous, and you're not sure which. "There's a passenger in row 9, window seat," Vivian said. "I've been observing behavior that's consistent with pre-operational patterns. He's assembling something in his lap below the seatback line. His breathing suggests deliberate heart rate management. He's conducting systematic scans of the cabin at regular intervals. And he boarded with a military surplus bag that is maintained physical contact with for the entire flight." She said it clearly, specifically, with the precision of someone who has filed 10,000 reports and knows that detail is the difference between being heard and being dismissed. Nicole stared at her. "Pre-operational patterns," she repeated. "Yes." "And you know this. How?" It was the question Vivian expected. It was the right question. It was also the question where the answer mattered less than the listener's willingness to hear it. "I have a background in security," Vivian said. "I've been trained to recognize these indicators. I'm asking you to relay my concern to the flight deck so the captain can assess whether to notify TSA or request law enforcement to meet the aircraft." She didn't say FBI. She didn't say director. She didn't flash credentials. She wasn't carrying credentials. This was personal travel. Her badge and weapon were in a safe at her home in Virginia. She was a civilian on this airplane, and she was making a civilian report of a security concern, which is something that any passenger has a right to do and that every flight crew member is trained to take seriously. The question was whether Nicole would take it seriously when it came from a woman who looked like Vivian. Nicole looked at row 9. The man was sitting quietly, still, from Nicole's angle, standing in the aisle, looking over 5 rows of seat backs. He looked like every other passenger on the plane. Calm, unremarkable, normal. She looked back at Vivian. She said, "I appreciate you saying something, but I've been through this cabin 3 times, and I haven't noticed anything unusual. The gentleman in row 9 looks like he's just sitting there." "He's not just sitting there. With respect, I think he is, and I need to get back to service. If you'd like, I can make a note and we can have someone meet you at the gate in Chicago to discuss it further." Meet you at the gate. Not meet the aircraft. Not alert the captain. Meet you, singular, at the gate. The concern had already been reclassified. It was no longer a security report. It was a passenger management issue. Vivian was the issue. "Nicole," Vivian said, reading her name tag, "I'm asking you to pass this information to the flight deck. That's all I'm asking. You don't have to agree with my assessment. You just have to relay it. The captain can make the decision. And I'm telling you that I don't think there's anything to relay. I've got 142 passengers on this plane and a service to run, and I can't go to the captain every time someone thinks they see something suspicious. I'm sure you understand." She smiled, the professional smile, the smile that closes a conversation while pretending to leave it open. And then she said a sentence that she would remember for a very long time. "Maybe try to relax. Have some water. We'll be in Chicago before you know it." She turned and walked back toward the front galley. Vivian watched her go. Then she looked at row 9. The man's hands were still moving. 90 seconds passed. Vivian made a decision. She got up. She walked forward, up the aisle, past row 9. She didn't look at the man, but her peripheral vision captured a freeze frame as she passed. Hands in lap, something small and metallic between his fingers. Not a phone, not a pen, something she couldn't identify at that speed, and continued to the front galley. The galley curtain was half-drawn. Nicole was inside, organizing a service cart. Another flight attendant, male, younger, name tag reading Jason, was pouring coffee. "Excuse me," Vivian said. She stood at the edge of the curtain. She did not enter the galley. She did not raise her voice. Nicole turned. Her expression was no longer the professional smile. It was something harder. "I asked you to return to your seat." "You didn't, actually. You told me to relax and have water. I'm here because I need to speak with the captain, and I need you to facilitate that." "The captain is not available." "The captain is available. TSA protocol requires that any security concern reported by a passenger be communicated to the pilot in command. You're not required to agree with the concern. You are required to relay it. That's Title 49, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 1544. She said it from memory, because she knew it from memory, because knowing the regulatory framework of aviation security was part of the job she'd held for 3 years and part of the career she'd held for 31, and because the woman standing in front of her, holding a coffee pot, was refusing to do the one thing that every training manual, every TSA directive, and every post-9 or 11 security protocol required her to do, pass the information up. Nicole set down the coffee pot. "How do you know that regulation?" she asked. But it wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion. The question was not "tell me more so I can help." The question was, why does this woman know things she shouldn't know? "Because I work in federal law enforcement," Vivian said. "You work in law enforcement?" "Yes." Nicole looked at her. The look lasted 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Nicole performed the same rapid sorting that every person in this story performs. The instant, unconscious categorization that happens before thought, before reason, before anything resembling fairness. She saw a black woman in jeans and a pullover claiming to work in federal law enforcement and citing aviation security regulations from memory, and her brain completed a circuit. The circuit said, "No, not no. I don't believe you." Nicole wouldn't have articulated it that way. The circuit was faster than language. It was just no, a negation, a rejection of the premise. The same way you'd reject someone telling you the sky is green. You wouldn't argue with them. You'd just know they were wrong, and you'd act accordingly. Nicole said, and her voice had changed again. Harder now. Controlled but hard, the way a voice gets when someone has decided you are the problem and is now managing you. "I need you to return to your seat. Now." "I'll return to my seat after you agree to contact the flight deck." "I'm not contacting the flight deck base on. I'm sorry. What exactly? You watched a man sit still, and now you think is a terrorist." She said the word terrorist at a normal volume, in the galley, with the curtain half open, within earshot of the first 3 rows of the cabin. Vivian felt several passengers turn. "I didn't use that word," Vivian said quietly. "I described specific behavioral indicators and asked you to relay my concern to the captain. That's the protocol. I'm asking you to follow it. And I'm asking you to sit down. For the 3rd time. It's the 2nd time. And I will. As soon as—" "Jason," Nicole said, turning to the other flight attendant. "Get me the sat phone. I'm calling the ground." She didn't say what she was calling the ground about, but the way she said it, looking at Vivian, not at the man in row 9, made the subject clear. Jason hesitated. He looked at Vivian. He looked at Nicole. Something moved across his face. Not quite doubt, but adjacent to doubt. The shadow of a question he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask. He handed Nicole the phone. "Here's what happened in the next 4 minutes, and I need to tell it to you precisely, because precision is a difference between a story and a record." Nicole Westbrook called the Airline's operations center on the sat phone. She identified herself, provided the flight number, and reported a disruptive passenger in row 14C who was refusing to comply with crew instructions and making unfounded security claims about another passenger. Disruptive, refusing to comply, unfounded, 3 words. Each one a lie. Each one a brick in a structure being built around Vivian Lockhart in real time. Vivian was not disruptive. She had not raised her voice, moved aggressively, touched anyone, or interfered with the operation of the aircraft. She had pressed a call button, spoken quietly, walked to the galley, and cited a federal regulation. She was not refusing to comply. She had been asked to return to her seat, and she had stated, calmly, clearly, that she would do so after a security concern was relayed to the captain. That's not refusal. That's a condition. The difference matters. Her claims were not unfounded. She had described specific, observable behaviors that are listed in the TSA's own behavioral detection training materials as indicators of potential pre-operational activity. Whether those indicators warranted action was a judgment call, the captain's judgment call. But describing them was not unfounded. It was reporting. 3 words. All wrong. All believed. The operations center relayed the report to the captain via CARS, the aircraft's text-based communication system. The captain read the message. He made a decision. He instructed Nicole to secure the passenger and have law enforcement meet the aircraft. Nicole hung up the phone. She walked back to Vivian, who was still standing at the edge of the galley. Jason was behind her. A third flight attendant, a woman named Danielle who worked the rear cabin, had come forward after hearing the raised voices. Nicole said, "The captain has been informed. You are being directed to return to your seat immediately. You will remain seated for the duration of the flight. Law enforcement will meet the aircraft in Chicago." Vivian looked at her. Law enforcement is meeting the aircraft because of me, or because of the passenger in row 9? Because of you. Did you relay my security concern to the captain? I relayed the situation to the captain. He has made his decision. The situation. What situation did you describe? I need you to return to your seat now. If you don't comply, I am authorized to restrain you. Vivian stood very still. She looked at Nicole. She looked at Jason. She looked at Danielle. She looked at the cabin behind her, where a dozen passengers were watching, some with phones raised, some with the wide, uncertain eyes of people who don't know what they are seeing but know it's wrong. She thought about the man in row 9. She thought about the thing in his hands. She thought about the fact that in approximately 70 minutes, this aircraft will begin its descent into a hair, and whatever was in that man's hands would still be there, uninspected, unreported, because the person who noticed it had been reclassified from a source of information to a source of disruption. She thought about all of this in approximately 2 seconds. Then she walked back to her seat and sat down, and Nicole Westbrook followed her with the zip ties. Vivian didn't speak while Nicole tied her to the seat. She didn't protest. She didn't explain. She didn't say, "I'm the director of the FBI." She didn't say, "You're making a mistake." She didn't say anything, because she understood, with the clarity of a woman who had spent 3 decades studying human behavior under pressure, that nothing she said in this moment would change the outcome. Nicole had committed. The captain had decided. The system was in motion. And a system in motion doesn't stop because the person it's acting on provides new information. It stops when the consequences arrive. The consequences were going to arrive. But right now, Vivian was in zip ties. The passenger next to her, 14B, a middle-aged white man in a golf shirt, pressed himself against the window as if Vivian might be contagious. He didn't look at her. He looked at Nicole. Is she? Everything is fine, sir, Nicole said. Just a precaution. Please remain in your seat. A precaution. A black woman zip-tied to an armrest in economy class while 141 passengers watched. A precaution. Vivian closed her eyes. Not because she was defeated, because she was thinking. Her mind was doing what it always did under pressure, sorting, prioritizing, sequencing. She was constructing a timeline. She was cataloging facts. She was preparing. She opened her eyes and looked at row 9. The man was no longer assembling something in his hands. His hands were now flat on his thighs. His posture had changed. He was sitting straighter, more alert. He'd noticed a disturbance in the cabin. His scanning pattern had stopped. He was looking forward, at the galley, with an expression that Vivian could only describe as evaluative. He was assessing whether the disturbance changed his situation. Vivian's stomach tightened. She looked around the cabin for Jason. He was in the aisle near row 8, collecting trash from a previous service pass. She had a clear line of sight to him. "Jason," she said. "Quiet. Direct. Not a request. A summons." He toned. He looked at her zip-tied wrists, at her calm face, and she saw the doubt again. Clearer this time. The doubt of a person who knew that something about this situation didn't make sense but who lacked the authority or the courage to say so. "Row 9, window," Vivian said. "Look at his hands." Jason looked at her. He looked at row 9. From his position in the aisle near row 8, he could see the passenger clearly, closer than Vivian had been, at a better angle. He looked, and his face changed. I've seen that face before. Not in person, in photographs. Crime scene photographs, accident reports, the frozen expressions of people captured in the moment they realized that what they assumed was ordinary is something else entirely. The face doesn't move toward panic. It moves toward stillness. A focused, rigid stillness, as if the body is trying to become smaller, quieter, less visible while the brain processes information it didn't expect and doesn't want. Jason saw what Vivian had seen. The object in the man's hands. Small, metallic, partially assembled. Not a phone, not a pen, not anything that belonged in a passenger's lap on a commercial aircraft. Jason looked back at Vivian. His eyes were wide. She didn't nod. She didn't gesture. She couldn't. Her wrists were tied. She just held his gaze and said, very quietly, "Tell the captain. Now." Jason turned and walked. Not ran. Walked. Because running would cause panic. To the front galley. He disappeared through the curtain. 14 seconds later, the cockpit door opened and closed. 22 seconds after that, the captain's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a captain. We're going to begin our descent into Chicago a little earlier than planned. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight attendants, secure the cabin." His voice was calm. Practiced. The voice of a man who had been told something that changed his understanding of the flight, and was now doing exactly what his training required. The seatbelt sign came on. Nicole, who was in the rear galley, looked up at the PA speaker with confusion. They were still 40 minutes from Chicago. The descent was early. That didn't happen without a reason. She walked forward. She reached the front galley. She spoke to Jason. And then she looked back at row 14. At Vivian. At the zip ties. And for the first time, something in Nicole Westbrook's face cracked. Let me tell you what Jason told her, because the sequence matters. Jason told her that he'd looked at row 9. He told her that the passenger in the window seat had an object in his hands that he couldn't identify but that didn't look right. He told her that the woman in 14C, the woman they'd tied to a seat, had told him to look. He told her that he'd informed the captain. He told her that the captain had contacted the airline's operations center, which had contacted TSA, which had contacted the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which had initiated a protocol that was now, at this moment, resulting in the scramble of law enforcement assets at O'Hare International Airport to meet the aircraft upon arrival. Nicole listened. Her face was the color of raw dough. "She told you," Nicole said. "Yes." "She's been telling us." Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. Nicole looked at the front of the cabin. She looked at the cockpit door. She looked at the galley curtain. She was searching for something, an exit, an explanation, a version of the past 17 minutes that didn't end with a realization that she had zip-tied the one person on this airplane who was trying to keep everyone safe. There was no version like that. There was only what happened. She walked back to row 14. Vivian looked up at her. Her wrists were still tied. Her face was still calm. The Toni Morrison paperback had slid off her lap and was on the floor, spine bent at page 214. Nicole stood in the aisle. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. "I need to remove the restraints," she said. "Yes," Vivian said. "You do." Nicole reached for the zip ties. Her hands were shaking. Not dramatically, a fine tremor, barely visible, the kind that comes from adrenaline meeting shame in the nervous system. She tried to find a release point on the tie. There wasn't one. Zip ties don't release. They cut. She didn't have a cutter. "Jason," she said, without turning around. Bring the emergency shears. Jason brought them. Nicole cut the zip ties. One, then the other. The plastic fell away. Vivian's wrists were red where the ties had pressed. She rubbed them once, briefly, and then placed her hands in her lap. "Thank you," Vivian said. She said it without irony, without sarcasm, without any of the pointed courtesies that people deploy when they want to make someone feel the weight of what they've done. She said it because the ties were off, and she was grateful they were off, and the word "thank you" was appropriate regardless of what had preceded it. Nicole stood there. She wanted to say something. You could see it, the words stacking up behind her teeth, pressing forward, looking for formation that could hold the weight of what she'd done. An apology? Too small. An explanation? Too late. A question? Why didn't you tell me who you were? That would reveal, in its asking, that the problem wasn't information. The problem was that she'd had information and thrown it away because it came from the wrong face. "I need to get back to the galley," Nicole said. "Of course," Vivian said. Nicole left. Vivian picked up her book. She didn't open it. She held it in her lap and looked at row 9, where the man was sitting motionless now, hands flat, eyes forward, waiting. Whatever he was, he knew something had changed. The early descent, the cabin crew's sudden urgency, the silence that had fallen over the aircraft like a held breath. He knew, and in 27 minutes, the plane would be on the ground, and what he knew wouldn't matter anymore. Flight 2714 landed at a hair at 3:47 p.m. Central Time. It didn't taxi to a gate. It was directed to a remote stand on the east side of the airfield, a concrete pad reserved for aircraft that require security intervention before passengers deplane. Through the windows, passengers could see them. 3 black SUVs, 2 marked Chicago PD units, and a tactical van positioned at the base of the mobile stairway that was being driven toward the aircraft. Men and women in body armor and windbreakers. The windbreakers read FBI in yellow letters. The captain made one more announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. There will be a brief delay before deplaning. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The forward door opened. 6 agents came up the stairs and boarded. The lead agent was a man named Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Cole, 421, Chicago Field Office, Joint Terrorism Task Force. He'd been briefed during the flight's descent. He knew the seat number. He knew the threat assessment. He did not yet know who had made the original report. Marcus Cole walked down the aisle to row 9. The passengers were silent. The cabin was still. The only sound was a low whine of the engine spooling down. He stopped at the row. He looked at the man in the window seat. "Say, I need you to place your hands on the seat back in front of you. Slowly." The man didn't move. For a long 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he placed his hands on the seat back. Marcus's partner, an agent named Rivera, reached under the seat and extracted the backpack. She opened it on the floor of the aisle. "I'm not going to tell you what was in the backpack. Not because I don't know, because the details are part of an ongoing investigation, and the specifics are classified. What I can tell you is what became public record in the weeks that followed. The man's name was Todd Andrew Bressler. He was 34. He was on the FBI's domestic terrorism watch list. He had been flagged by the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit 8 months earlier based on online activity and financial patterns. He was under passive monitoring, meaning the Bureau was aware of him but had not yet moved to an active investigation. He had not been flagged by TSA when he boarded the flight in Charlotte. His name was on a monitoring list, not a no-fly list. The screening gap between the 2 categories was a known vulnerability in the system, known, acknowledged, and unfixed. What was in his backpack and what was in his hands constituted, in the language of the criminal complaint filed 2 days later, materials and components consistent with the preparation of an improvised destructive device. He was arrested. He was removed from the aircraft in handcuffs. The passengers watched in silence as he was walked down the mobile stairs and placed in the back of one of the SUVs. And then Marcus Cole came back up the stairs. He walked to row 14. He looked at the woman in 14C. "I'm Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Cole, FBI Chicago. I understand you were the one who reported the security concern." "I was," Vivian said. "Can I ask your name?" "Vivian Lockhart." Marcus Cole's face went through a sequence that I've seen before. In Rick Tolvinen's conference room, in Carol Middleton's school office, in every story where someone suddenly realizes that the person they've been treating as ordinary is anything but. The sequence goes hearing, processing, recognizing, recalibrating. It takes about 4 seconds. It feels like 40. Director Lockhart, he said. Yes. He stared at her. He looked at her wrists, where the red marks from the zip ties were still visible. He looked at the cut plastic on the floor beside her seat. He looked at Nicole Westbrook, who was standing in the aisle 6 rows forward, watching, her face blank in a way that faces go blank when the brain has shut down all non-essential functions to focus on the single task of not falling apart. Marcus said, and then he stopped. He didn't know what to say. What do you say to the director of the FBI, your boss's 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 boss, when she's sitting in economy class with zip-tie marks on her wrist because a flight attendant decided she was a threat instead of the person who identified the threat? Agent Cole, Vivian said, the passenger in row 9 has been in my field of vision for approximately 90 minutes. I observed behavioral indicators consistent with pre-operational preparation. I reported those indicators to the cabin crew approximately. She checked her watch 53 minutes ago. My report was dismissed. I was subsequently restrained with zip ties at the direction of the lead flight attendant, Ms. Westbrook, who characterized me to the airline's operations center as a disruptive passenger making unfounded claims. She said it the way she said everything, calmly, precisely, without inflection, as if she were dictating a report, which, in a sense, she was. Every word was a timestamp. Every sentence was a brick. The flight attendant who relayed my concern to the captain was Mr. Jason Huang, who independently observed the passenger in row 9 after I directed his attention there. Mr. Huang's report was the basis of the captain's decision to contact TSA. My original report, which preceded Mr. Huang's by approximately 12 minutes, was not relayed. Marcus Cole was recording on his phone. He looked like a man who was simultaneously doing his job and rethinking every assumption he'd ever made about what the director of the FBI looked like on a Saturday. I'll need to include this in the incident report, he said. I'll provide a full written statement, Vivian said. But right now, I need a deplane. My sister's birthday is Saturday, and I'd like to get to Oak Park before dinner. She stood up. She picked up her paperback, crouching to get it from the floor, smoothing the bent spine with her thumb. She retrieved her small carry-on bag from the overhead bin. She stepped into the aisle. As she walked toward the front of the aircraft, she passed Nicole Westbrook. Nicole was pressed against the galley wall. Her arms were crossed over her chest. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was holding it, the way you hold something that's going to break the moment you loosen your grip. Vivian stopped. They looked at each other. The passenger in row 9 was real, Vivian said. What I told you was accurate. What you did with it is something you'll need to sit with. She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way you say a fact. The way you tell someone their blood pressure is high. Not to punish, to inform. Then she walked down the mobile stays, past the SUVs, past the tactical team, past the Chicago PD perimeter, and into the terminal. She found the ground transportation area. She got into a taxi. Oak Park, she said. The driver adjusted his mirror. You got it. She leaned her head against the window and watched the city go by. The afternoon light was golden. The expressway was doing its thing. Chicago was loud and alive and indifferent to what had happened at 31,000 feet. She called Claudine. Hey, see, I'm in a cab. Be there in 40 minutes. You okay? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just a long flight. Well, hurry up. Mama's potato salad is almost gone and Tyrone's kids are feral. Vivian smiled. Save me a plate. I always save you a plate. She hung up. She looked at her wrists. The red marks were fading. The record wouldn't. Here's what happened in the days and weeks that followed, told in the order it happened, because order is how systems work, and Vivian Lockhart believed in systems. Day 1. Vivian attended Claudine's birthday party. She ate potato salad. She chased Tyrone's kids around the backyard. She sat on the porch with her mother, 8 to 4 years old, sharp as a blade, still living in a house on Lathrop Avenue, and drank sweet tea and talked about nothing important, Because sometimes the most important thing is nothing. She didn't mention the flight. Not to Claudine. Not to her mother. Not to anyone at the party. She held it the way she held classified information, privately, securely, until the proper time for disclosure. Day 2. She flew back to Washington. First class, this time, on a different airline, with her protective detail. Agent Torres, her lead agent, noticed the marks on her wrists when she reached for her coffee. Director, what happened to your wrists? Zip ties, Vivian said. Torres stared at her. It's handled, Vivian said. I'll brief you Monday. Torres looked like a man who wanted to arrest an airplane. Day 3. Monday morning. Vivian arrived at FBI headquarters, the J. Edgar Hoover building on Pennsylvania Avenue, at 6:15 a.m., as she did every morning. She went to her office on the 7th floor. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She wrote her statement. 11 pages. She described everything, the behavioral indicators she'd observed, her initial report to Nicole Westbrook, Nicole's dismissal, Vivian's second attempt in the galley, Nicole's call to operations, the mischaracterization of Vivian as a disruptive passenger, the zip ties, Jason Huang's subsequent observation, the captain's response, the landing, the arrest of Todd Bressler. She wrote it the way she wrote everything, precise, detailed, without adjectives. She didn't describe Nicole as racist. She didn't describe the experience as humiliating. She described what happened. She let the facts carry the weight that adjectives couldn't. When the statement was complete, she sent it to 3 places. First, the FBI's Inspection Division, which handled internal integrity matters and incidents involving Bureau personnel. The incident involved the director personally, so the Inspection Division would coordinate with the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility. Second, the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, which had jurisdiction over airline passenger rights violations. Third, the Transportation Security Administration, which had jurisdiction over aviation security protocols and the conduct of airline crew members in security-related situations. She also sent a separate communication, a formal inquiry, to the airline CEO, requesting a full accounting of the incident on Flight 2714, including all crew reports, communications with the operations center, and the captain's log entries. Then she called a meeting with her deputy director and her chief counsel. She briefed them on the incident. She was clinical, thorough. She answered their questions without emotion. Her chief counsel, a woman named Patricia Song, who had been with the Bureau for 19 years and had seen everything, sat in stunned silence for several seconds after Vivian finished. They zip-tied you, Patricia said. Yes. The director of the FBI. They didn't know I was a director of the FBI. Does that matter? It matters in a specific way. The question isn't whether they would have treated me differently if they'd known who I was. Of course they would have. The question is why they treated me the way they did when they didn't know. That's the question that matters. Because I'm one person, and what happened to me happens to other people. People who don't have 11-page statements and 3 federal agencies to send them to. Patricia looked at her. What do you want to happen? I want the airline to be held accountable for its crew's failure to follow security reporting protocols. I want the TSA to review its guidance on passenger-initiated security reports and the crew response requirements. And I want the screening gap that allowed Bressler to bar that flight to be closed. All 3. All 3. That's going to make headlines. It should. A man with watchlist flags and bomb components boarded a domestic flight because the system had a gap. A passenger identified the threat and was restrained instead of heard. Both of those things are systemic failures, and both of them need to be addressed publicly. Patricia nodded. And the flight attendant? The flight attendant made choices. Those choices will be addressed by her employer and by the DOT. I'm not interested in personal retribution. I'm interested in the system that allowed her choices to go unchecked. Day 4. The story broke. Not because Vivian leaked it. Because the arrest of Todd Bressler on terrorism-related charges was a matter of public record, and public records attract reporters, and reporters ask questions, and the questions led, within 24 hours, to the discovery that the threat had been initially identified by a passenger who was subsequently restrained by the cabin crew. Within 48 hours, The passenger's identity became known. The headline in the Washington Post read, FBI director was zip-tied on flight after reporting terror suspect. Crew dismiss her warnings. The story went everywhere. Cable news, social media, international press. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a take. The takes range from outrage to deflection to the particular genre of commentary that says, well, the flight attendant was just doing her job without examining what her job actually required. Vivian did not give interviews. She did not appear on television. She did not post on social media. She issued one statement through the Bureau's Public Affairs Office. On February, I reported a security concern to the cabin crew of Flight 2714. That concern was dismissed, and I was restrained. The concern was subsequently validated when law enforcement arrested a passenger who was in possession of materials consistent with an improvised destructive device. I have filed reports with the appropriate federal agencies and the airline. I trust the process. I will not be commenting further. 14 words that mattered. I trust the process. I will not be commenting further. That sentence was Vivian Lockhart in miniature. She had built a career on trusting the process, not blindly, not naively, but strategically. She trusted the process the way an engineer trusts a bridge, because she understood its structure, knew its load limits, and had personally inspected every bolt. The process worked when it was held accountable. The process failed when it wasn't. She was going to hold it accountable. Day 12. The airline completed its internal investigation. The findings were comprehensive and damning. Nicole Westbrook had violated 3 separate protocols: the TSA's passenger security report relay requirement, the airline's own crew response procedures for in-flight security concerns, and the airline's use of force guidelines, which required supervisory authorization before physical restraint of a passenger. Nicole had not contacted the captain when Vivian made her initial report. She had not documented the report. She had not followed the escalation protocol. Instead, she had unilaterally characterized Vivian as a threat, contacted the operations center with a false description of the situation, and physically restrained a passenger who had committed no violation of any law, regulation, or airline policy. The investigation also found that Jason Huang had attempted, on 2 occasions during the incident, to suggest to Nicole that the passenger's concerns should be taken seriously. On both occasions, Nicole had overruled him. Jason's account, provided in a confidential interview, stated that he had felt something was off about Nicole's response from the beginning, but had deferred to her seniority. Nicole Westbrook was terminated. The airline CEO issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, apologizing to Vivian by name, and announcing a series of corrective measures: revised crew training protocols for security report handling, mandatory bias awareness training for all cabin crew, and a new policy requiring dual crew authorization for any passenger restraint. Day 19. The TSA issued a security directive to all U.S. airlines requiring that any security concern reported by a passenger be documented and relayed to the pilot in command within 5 minutes of receipt. The directive included a specific prohibition on crew members characterizing a reporting passenger as disruptive solely on the basis of the report itself. Making a security report was not disruptive behavior. It was protected conduct. The directive made that explicit. The directive also initiated a review of the screening gap that had allowed Bressler to board. The gap between the monitoring list and the no-fly list was a known issue, known for years, studied, debated, and deferred. Vivian's incident gave it urgency. Within 6 months, the TSA implemented a new protocol requiring enhanced screening for all passengers on the monitoring list, including secondary inspection and behavioral assessment at the gate. Would that protocol have caught Bressler? The TSA's internal assessment said, probably. The behavioral indicators Vivian observed at 31,000 feet were the same indicators a trained screener would have identified at the gate. The sweating, the controlled breathing, the systematic scanning, the deliberate contact with the bag. The protocol wouldn't be perfect. No protocol is. But it was better than the gap. And better, in security, is measured in lives. Day 30. Vivian received 2 letters at her office. The first was from Jason Huang. It was handwritten, on plain paper, in careful print. Director Lockhart, I want you to know that I think about Flight 2714 every day. Not the arrest, the 12 minutes, The 12 minutes between when you told Nicole what you saw and when I finally looked for myself. In those 12 minutes, I knew something was wrong. I knew Nicole wasn't handling it right, and I didn't speak up. I told myself it was because she was senior. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I looked at you and I didn't see what I should have seen. I saw what Nicole saw, and I let that determine how seriously I took your words. I can't undo those 12 minutes, but I can make sure I never lose 12 minutes like that again. I am now the person on my crew who listens first and sorts later. That's because of you. Respectfully, Jason Huang. Vivian read the letter twice. She put it in the top drawer of her desk, where she kept things that mattered. The second letter was from Nicole Westbrook. It was typed, 2 paragraphs. It said, in essence, that Nicole was sorry for what happened and that she had not intended any disrespect and that she hoped Director Lockhart understood that the situation had been confusing and fast-moving and that Nicole had been trying to maintain control of the cabin. Vivian read it once. She noticed what wasn't in it. There was no acknowledgement of the specific thing Nicole had done, not the zip ties, not the false report to operations, not the refusal to relay the security concern. There was no recognition that her assessment of Vivian had been shaped by something other than the facts. There was no examination of the circuit, the fast, invisible circuit that had sorted Vivian into a category before she'd finished her first sentence. The letter was an apology for a situation, not for a decision, not for a pattern, not for the 12 minutes that could have cost 142 lives. Vivian put the letter in a file, not the top drawer, the file cabinet, where records lived. There was one more piece, the piece that made this story something other than an incident. 3 months after Flight 2714, Vivian Lockhart stood in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. She was there for her annual oversight hearing, a routine appearance where the director of the FBI briefs the committee on the Bureau's activities, priorities, and challenges. The hearing covered the usual ground: counterterrorism, cybercrime, domestic extremism, public corruption. 2 hours of questions and answers, most of them expected. Then Senator Arlene Whitfield, the ranking member, a 70-year-old black woman from Georgia who had been in the Senate for 22 years and who had a reputation for asking the one question nobody prepared for, leaned into her microphone. Director Lockhart, I'd like to ask you about something that isn't in your prepared testimony. Yes, Senator. 3 months ago, you personally identified a terror suspect on a commercial flight. You reported that identification to the cabin crew, and the crew's response was to put you in zip ties. The hearing room was very quiet. That's correct, Senator. You are the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are the highest-ranking law enforcement official in this country, and you were zip-tied to a seat because a flight attendant decided that a black woman in economy class couldn't possibly be a credible source of security information. I wouldn't characterize a flight attendant's reasoning, Senator. I can only describe her actions. I'll characterize it for you. Then, what happened to you on that flight is what happens to black women in this country every day. In airports, in hospitals, in schools, in offices, in every space where a woman who looks like you or looks like me walks in with expertise and walks out with zip marks on her wrists. The only difference is that you have a title that eventually made people listen. Most women don't. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Senator, I agree with you. And I'd add one thing. The title shouldn't matter. The information should matter. A passenger on an A-plane reported a credible threat. That report should have been relayed, evaluated, and acted on regardless of who made it. The fact that it wasn't, the fact that the reporting passenger's credibility was determined by her appearance rather than her information, is a systems failure, not just a human resources issue, a security failure. Because the next person who sees something and says something might not be the director of the FBI. She might be a grandmother, a teacher, a cleaning woman. And if the system dismisses her the way it dismissed me, we don't just fail her. We fail everyone on plane. Senator Whitfield leaned back in her chair. She looked at Vivian over the top of her glasses a way that older black women look at younger black women when they are proud but don't want to make it sentimental. The look that says, I know what that cost you. I know you handled it, and I know you're not done. Thank you, Director, Senator Whitfield said. Thank you, Senator. The hearing moved on, but the clip of that exchange, 4 minutes and 12 seconds, was viewed 11 million times in the first week. Not because it was dramatic, not because anyone raised their voice, because it was true, and because the truth, when it's spoken by a woman who has been calm long enough to say it precisely, has a weight that spectacle can never match. 6 months later, the TSA's enhanced screening protocol was credited with identifying and intercepting 2 additional individuals on the monitoring list who were carrying prohibited items. Neither incident made national news. Neither involved the FBI director. They were quiet interdictions, the kind that happen when a system works the way it's supposed to work, when the gaps are closed, when the reports are read, when the information is treated as credible regardless of who provides it. 2 interdictions. Anonymous, undramatic, the kind of thing that doesn't trend and doesn't go viral and doesn't generate a single like or share. The kind of thing that saves lives. Vivian Lockhart read about both interdictions in her morning intelligence briefing. She didn't circle them. She didn't make a note. She turned the page and moved on to the next item, because the work doesn't pause for satisfaction and the record doesn't need your commentary. It just needs you to keep building it. She kept building it. Every morning, 6:15 a.m., 7th floor. The desk, the briefing, the decisions that nobody sees and everybody depends on, the Timex watch on her wrist, the small gold pendant she wore sometimes, not the bureau seal, not a flag pin, just a simple pendant her mother had given her when she was confirmed by the Senate. A small disc engraved with one word, steady, her mother had said, when she gave it to her. They are going to test you every single day. Not because you're not ready, because they don't believe you are. And the only answer to that, the only answer that works, is to be so steady that the ground beneath them shifts before you do. Vivian hadn't told her mother about the zip ties. She would, eventually, at Thanksgiving, probably, when the family was gathered and the story could be told in full, with the accountability and the outcomes and the changes that followed. Her mother would listen. Her mother would be quiet for a moment. And then her mother would say something that cut through every layer of policy and protocol and got to the bone of the thing. She always did. And now I need to ask you something. Are you thinking about Nicole Westbrook? Because I want to be careful here. I want to be precise. Nicole Westbrook was not a monster. She was not a caricature of bigotry. She was a 33-year-old woman who had been doing her job for 6 years and who had, in the span of 17 minutes, made a series of decisions that nearly cost 142 lives, not because she was evil, but because she was certain. Certain that she knew what a credible person looked like. Certain that the woman in 14C wasn't one. Certain that her own assessment of the situation was more reliable than the detailed, specific, regulatory citing report of a trained professional who happened to be black and dressed in jeans. That certainty was a danger. Not shouting, not slurs, not the overt, unmistakable kind of prejudice that everyone agrees is wrong. The quiet kind, the instant kind, the kind that runs like a background program, sorting people before they speak, filing them into categories that determine whether their words are heard as information or noise. Nicole's circuit ran in less than a second. And in less than a second, it decided that Vivian Lockhart, Georgetown law degree, Quantico graduate, 31 years of federal service, director of the FBI, was noise. The circuit didn't ask for evidence. It didn't weigh facts. It didn't consult the regulatory framework or the security protocols or the simple, obvious reality that a woman who can cite Title 49 from memory might know what she's talking about. It just decided. And then Nicole built an entire response around that decision, dismissing the report, mischaracterizing the passenger, authorizing restraint, all to reinforce a conclusion she'd reached before Vivian finished her first sentence. That's not strength. That's not authority. That's not doing her job. That's a system failing because the person operating it couldn't see past her own assumptions. And the thing that should keep you up at night is this. Nicole Westbrook would have passed any bias test you gave her. She would have checked the right boxes. She would have said the right things. She would have told you, sincerely, that she treated all passengers equally. She would have believed it. She would have been wrong. But she would have believed it. And she would have kept believing it. Flight after flight, passenger after passenger, year after year. If Vivian Lockhart hadn't spilled tea on that plane, and Todd Bresser hadn't been in row 9, and Jason Huang hadn't finally looked where Vivian told him to look. The system caught it this time. This time. Right now. Not in this story. Right now. Today, someone is sitting on an airplane. She sees something. Something small. Something most people would miss. But she doesn't miss it because she's been paying attention her whole life. Because paying attention is what you do when the world has taught you that nobody's paying attention to you. She presses a call button. She waits. Someone comes. She speaks clearly. She describes what she saw. She's specific. She's calm. She's right. And the person she's speaking to looks at her face and makes a decision that has nothing to do with what she said. The question isn't whether she's credible. The question is whether the person she's talking to has a capacity to see credibility in a face that doesn't match their expectations. The question is whether the system, the airline, the protocol, the training, the culture, has built in enough safeguard to override the circuit when the circuit is wrong. The question is whether anyone is listening. Vivian Lockhart was listening. She's still listening. And somewhere right now, on a flight you'll never hear about, a woman who sees what others miss is pressing the call button. The light is on. Nobody's come yet.